Hey, what's up everyone? I hope everybody's doing well. So brown algae. Brown algae is a really frustrating algae to get. Usually you get it at the beginning, right when your tank is set up for the first maybe 4 to 6 months and your tank is still immature. And I personally know plenty of people that have gotten out of the hobby because they just couldn't beat dinoflagellates or diatoms or brown algae, whatever you want to call it, cyanobacteria. They just couldn't beat them. So I just kind of wanted to show you how we've been successful in dealing with it. Now, don't get me wrong, it's really tough. It's not easy. There's a bunch of different methods, UV sterilizers, increasing nutrients, flow, siphoning, all that stuff. But I wanna kind of show you what we did and how we were successful. So I'm gonna show you guys a tank that we got about a little over a year ago. Another service company was taking care of this tank for a long time. The customer called us because the tank wasn't doing well, the corals were all dying, the fish weren't happy, just bad overall. We had coral-eating flatworms, tons of aptasia, and then this brown algae, which was just disgusting. It was like brown snot everywhere, all over the rocks. And then we had diatoms in the sand. It was disgusting. It was the worst brown algae outbreak I've personally ever seen. Now here we are, fast forward a year, a little over a year later, and I'm gonna go ahead and go inside and show you guys the tank and the way it looks now. So here we are at the tank. So all this rock work was just covered in brown, slimy algae. The sand, you can still see there's some remnants there, there's a little bit, but it was just caked with brown algae and cyanobacteria everywhere. Now let's take a look at this tank. Look at the corals in this tank. All these corals now, by the way, all these corals in the tank were all dying, they were all retracting, they looked terrible. So this is what they look like now. Look at the pallies. Look how nice and big and open those are. Look at the zoas. Look how nice and big and open they are. More zoas. Sunny D's up there looking great. Look at the size of this mushroom. It's huge. And not only is it huge, but if I'll zoom in here, it's got 3 babies that it just, 3 babies right beside it. Another mushroom down here that broke off. More zoanthids. These pallies popped off of this colony. Hammer coral looking beautiful. This was retracted. This was dying down. Another favia. Look how beautiful that is. Beautiful gold color. It's coming back. Mohawks are doing well. Now, some of these mohawks and things like the Kenya tree, part of the reason why we put these in the tank was to kind of outcompete that brown algae and act as filtration in this tank. We wanted to put more coral in this tank. Kenya tree is a good coral to put in the tank for balance and for filtration. Other side, Duncan coral. This was dying and it came back. So all these corals were dying. Acan looking healthy, frog spawn looking great, mushrooms are coming back looking great. Look at this favia right here. Polyps are out, it's hungry. Look at the size of this colony. We almost lost this thing. When we first started, this thing was almost dead and it's come back strong. I'm so happy. Acan is spreading like crazy. Big, fluffy, polyps are out. More pallies looking great, more zoanthids looking great. Acan's another acan. You can see we got some encrusting going on here. And over here on the war coral, you can see some encrusting back on the rock as well. And beautiful coralline algae growing throughout the whole tank, all on the rocks. So much coralline algae that you can see it's on the acrylic back there. All the fish are doing well, they're all healthy. I mean, that's a sign right there that you have a healthy tank. If you have a powder blue tang in your tank and he's doing good and he's fat and he's got no ick or anything like that or no problems, you know you got a healthy tank. So what was the approach to get rid of this brown algae? Well, we did struggle with it at first. It was definitely not easy. It did take some time, but that's the thing. You have to be very patient when it comes to brown algae. So what we did was, number one, we added some biodiversity in here. We added, now you might be hesitant to add coral in your tank because you've noticed that your coral aren't doing too well. So you don't want to put more coral in here, but the coral that we put in here are relatively hardy hardy species. So what we did, we put some mushrooms in here because they're fast growers and they're great with filtration. We put Kenya tree in here. And you can see that's starting to spread. Another great coral for filtration. We put some mohawks in here because they're a really hardy coral and they're a fast grower. So we put the coral in here for filtration to kind of help outcompete the negative algae that we had in this tank. Next, what I did was I got tons of snails. So a ton of turbo snails, Astrea snails, Stachyceras, everything. And we just had movement in this tank constantly. Constant movement in this tank and constant grazing in this tank. So I must have put about 40 snails in here. So we had that constant movement on the rockwork. Again, adding more biodiversity. For the sand, I added some conchs. Probably added about 5 conchs in this tank, which you can see right there. He's doing a great job already just sifting through the sand. So that kept the diatoms in the sand at bay. Just that movement of them constant grazing and the movement of tossing the sand around really helped keep the brown algae at bay and kept it from getting a foothold. You can see right there him sifting through that sand, and that action alone, once you have a bunch of these guys in your tank, that action alone is just constant cleaning the gravel and not allowing that brown algae to get a hold. There's another conch, and there's another conch right there. So a ton of conchs in here to help keep the sand clean. I also added a sand sifting starfish in here. Just a bunch of little critters that constantly are, cycling through the sand, keeping it stirred up and not allowing anything to kind of settle in the sand. So that's how we got rid of the diatoms in the sand. And then by using the snails on the rocks and constant grazing and constant motion on the rocks, that really helped keep the brown algae at bay. Now that's not all we did. We also added a small UV sterilizer to the tank. And then I think the two most important things that we did, along with adding the snails and the different little invertebrates in this tank, was we added our own bacteria. It's a bacteria that we've been culturing for a while at Tanknicians, and we've been testing it on tanks to fight brown algae and dinoflagellates and diatoms and all those cyanobacteria, all those nuisance algae. And it's worked really well for us so far. We really like the results. So we've been culturing that. So we added a bottle of that into the tank, which really seemed to kind of turn the tide in our favor. The other thing was getting those nitrates up. This tank, the nitrates were always 0, 0, 0. The nutrients were bottomed out. There was very low nitrate, very low phosphate. So we started dosing nitrate to the tank, and we got it up to around, I believe it's about 4 or 5 right now. And that definitely helped make a difference. Speaking of adding nutrients to the tank, let's go ahead and feed them. These guys look hungry. So getting those nitrates up definitely is going to help you. It's definitely going to help you get rid of your brown algae. Now, we did try UV sterilizer in this tank. It's still on there, but it's a small one. It's nothing too crazy. So I'm sure that's contributing to, I'm sure that's a contributing factor as well. But I really do believe by adding our own cultured bacteria in this tank and by increasing the nitrates and just giving it time to kind of be balanced, doing small water changes, I really think that that's what's helped us be successful in getting rid of the brown algae in this tank. We stopped doing big water changes in this tank. We did very minimal water changes, something like, I think the biggest one we did was like a 20%, and that's only because we were siphoning out off the brown algae, off the rocks and gravel vacuum, lightly gravel vacuuming the sand. Now, because the tank is balanced, we do very minimal water changes on this. We probably do about 10 to 15%, maybe every 2 weeks, just to keep the nitrates where we want them, and then make sure that the scales don't tip into where we start to have a nutrient explosion and then start having to deal with things like green hair algae. But we've been monitoring it, and it's been working out pretty well for us so far. Now, as far as dealing with some of the other issues that we had in this tank, we had tons of flatworms, like I said, but we put that Melanaris wrasse, if you see him back there behind the yellow tank, in the tank, and he just absolutely devoured all the flatworms in this tank. I mean, that Melanaris wrasse just took care of business. Within I'd say a 2 week, 3 week period, the majority of those flatworms were just gone. And I haven't seen any in forever. The other issue we had in here is we still kind of have is vermitid snails. You can see it on some of the rock work here. There's some vermitid snails. We've been slowly getting rid of those. We added some bumblebee snails in here to get rid of those. It seems like the vermitids aren't as big of a problem as they were. You can see right there sticking out, those little tubes sticking out. They don't seem to be as big of a problem. Obviously, they're not bothering the coral, so I'm not too worried about it. I just crush them. I just remove them every time I'm here as much as I can. And then we have the bumblebee snails also to kind of help take care of them, hopefully as well. And then the last issue we're dealing with is aptasia. Now you can see these white areas right here. That's an area where I've been using F-aptasia on to get rid of the aptasia that is in this tank. This whole tank was just littered with aptasia, all different sizes, small to very big. It was insane. And you can still see that there is still some aptasia here. Right, there's certain spots where it still is at, right there. We've been really focusing on, every time we're here, once a week, we just focus on hitting it with this F-aptasia. This stuff works great. I really like it. So every time we're here, we use F-aptasia on it, and we've really been putting a dent on the aptasia in this tank. Now, we're not able to use anything like peppermint shrimp. We're not able to use anything like peppermint shrimp in this tank just because the trigger, the Melanaris wrasse, would just devour them before they even had a fighting chance. So there's no point of that. An aptasia-eating filefish, we tried in this tank, but they started going after the Euphyllia coral, and that just wasn't an option for us. So we're manually having to go in there and get rid of it. So to quickly go over everything, how we got rid of the brown algae in this tank was, number one, increase your nitrates. Don't be scared to feed. I think a lot of times you see brown algae and people automatically assume, oh, my levels, my nitrates and my phosphates are too high. I gotta do a big water change. I gotta, it's gravel. I gotta, clean the sand. I gotta scrub. That's not how you get rid of brown algae. How you get rid of brown algae is by just letting your tank mature. That tank needs time to mature. Usually from the beginning to the 6-month period, you're gonna be fighting brown algae. That's completely normal. It's the ugly brown phase. And then usually around the 4 to 6 month period, then it starts to, the scales start to tip a bit, and you start dealing with green hair algae. And then you deal with that for maybe a month or so, and then eventually you're able to overcome that. And then at the year mark, your tank really starts to mature and balance out, and then you start having a healthy ecosystem. Our job is to make sure that the water chemistry is good and that we are tipping the scales in favor of the beneficial bacteria that's in your tank and giving it time to claim real estate in your tank to outcompete the brown algae and the other nuisance algae in your tank. So increase your nitrate, try to get it to around 5 at least. Keep it on your phosphate. Your phosphate doesn't have to be too high. Get some cleanup crew, stuff that works in the sand bed is really helpful. So conchs, sand sifting starfish are great. That's worked really well for us. Just that constant movement in the sand is just very beneficial. And snails, now I know a lot of times the snail, a lot of these brown algae can be toxic to the snails, but just that movement in the tank, plus they're adding more microbes that come on the snail that are getting into the water and then have a chance to replicate in your tank. You're getting different forms of bacteria in your tank that hopefully will seed in there and be more competition. We want something to beat that brown algae and that red algae in the tank. Blackouts work. We've tried blackouts in the past. They definitely work, but if you black out your tank for a week, number one, you're stressing out your corals. Number two, that doesn't mean it's not gonna come back. That doesn't mean it's dead. It just means your tank still has the conditions to where the brown algae can come back. You have to fix your water chemistry. Now, it does buy a little bit of time for the beneficial bacteria to seed the rocks, but in the meantime, you got to get your nitrates up. So if you do a blackout, dose nitrate at the same time. It's definitely helpful. Keep an eye on your levels. Give that beneficial bacteria time to gain real estate on the rock and the sand. And then the last thing, just be patient. Small water changes, give it time. Try corals. If you're gonna put corals in your tank, don't start with the LPS, don't start with SPS. Start with softies. I think even though you might not want Kenya tree in your tank long term, you can always put it in there just to act as like a base coral. Mushrooms, the same thing as a base coral. I don't so much think zoanthus do a good job, but there are some great pallies that do a great job of filtering your tank that are resilient, hold their own with a brown algae bloom. So just starting with some very durable, soft corals that grow fast. You can always take them out later. Your Kenya tree is no problem to take out. You can pull it out by hand. It adds biodiversity into your tank. It's your little microbes and bacteria that come on that coral that seed your tank. That coral is taking up nutrients also, which is tipping the scales again, which is another threat to that brown algae. Just be patient. Don't give up. It's completely normal to have brown algae. Don't get frustrated. Don't quit the hobby. You'll figure it out. There is no quick fix for this. It's really about stability, 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 and allowing your tank to mature. Adding any type of like supplement like a no-pox or a vibrance is counterproductive. I wouldn't suggest that. All right, so that's just my tips on how to deal with brown algae. If you guys have any comments on how you guys dealt with brown algae, drop it in the comments. I would love to open up a conversation about it. There's plenty of people out there that are struggling that would love to hear ways to get rid of it because it can be very frustrating. All right, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.